Hello, I'm Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, and thank you for joining me for this important conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about the intersectionality of disability and justice. And I think this is a really important conversation, particularly in the context of COVID-19, as we think about individuals living with disabilities. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to first and foremost say why this topic is really important to me. First of all, we all know someone, whether it's in our family, in our friendship circle, in our community, someone at work who is living with a disability. And we also know that the Black and Brown community also experiences disability. Now, during this COVID-19 pandemic, we have had a lot of conversation about people who are vulnerable, or we've heard of the discussion around people with chronic underlying health conditions and what that means for COVID-19. And for AccessLiving, which our guest works with AccessLiving, and I'll introduce her shortly. But what that means is that when we talk about chronic underlying health conditions, for AccessLiving, that really is deemed as living with a disability. Now, people will self-identify and should have the right to self-identify if they choose to use that term. But the fact of the matter is we know that people with chronic underlying health conditions and people with disabilities, people in the disability community, are more likely to be more vulnerable to also being contracting COVID-19 and also having more severe cases and or dying from COVID-19. So this is important for us to have a conversation about how COVID-19 has impacted the disability community, and more specifically to this conversation, what that intersectionality is as it relates to race and the topic of justice. So I'm honored to have with me today Candace Coleman, who is the racial justice community organizer with AccessLiving. And she does work, first and foremost, I know her personally from the restorative justice world, but she's also a longtime advocate of disability rights and of justice and disability rights. And I just want to thank Candace as well, because she is also a member of our Illinois Council on Women and Girls, which I chair. And Candace, I'm so grateful for your leadership on that council. So before we get started, Candace, how about I just tell us all, how are you doing and how are you holding up through these very challenging times?
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Stratton. I'm actually holding up okay. The isolation is really something in this COVID-19 epidemic. And so being a community organizer, wanting to be around people has been really, really challenging for me. And so everything has shifted virtually. And I'm just waiting for the day that I can get back in community with people that I work with and advocate with.
Yeah, I know certainly as a community organizer, being in community is so important to you. That's how we met. You're being in community and advocating for lots of different issues relating to justice. And I too miss those times, and we're making progress and we will get there. But until then, just continue to be safe, and I'm glad you're doing well. So let's get started with our conversation. AccessLiving is one of the organizations that you work with to promote disability rights. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the organization, as well as your role as racial justice organizer with AccessLiving? What does that mean? What kinds of issues are you working on?
Sure. So AccessLiving is a center for independent living for people with disabilities. We work with people across the Cook County area to support people with disabilities in getting access to services and supports. But also we do a lot of advocacy on a policy level. And what's interesting about AccessLiving is that we're led by people with disabilities. And so we have that firsthand lived experience that directly translates to advocating the policy and services and supports for people with disabilities.
Great. So I think, you know, as a restorative justice advocate, we always say the wisdom is in the room. So the fact that AccessLiving is led by people living with disabilities, it's important because the voice of your community is something that's important as we think about policy, advocating, and making sure those voices are at the table. So there are several programs, of course, under Access Living, but why don't you tell me about some of the programs, or maybe the program that is the most underused, and what are some things that can be done to kind of boost that program's profile?
So as a community organizer, I'm in the advocacy department, and it is extremely important to have allies in the issue areas that impact people with disabilities. And so we focus a lot in the arenas of healthcare, education, racial justice issues, immigration issues, and housing. And so it's really important for people to get involved in our legislative agenda, and you can do that through our listserv. We have a listserv of AccessLiving and information on what is actually happening and what supports can be offered.
So that, I think that's so important around, like, people can take any issue, but if you're not specifically thinking about how it might impact the disability community and including the voices at the table, then there might be some maybe obvious or maybe some sort of inadvertent ways that the disability community can be impacted. So it sounds like connecting with Access Living to make sure that those perspectives are shared and that there can be sort of, a discussion around how to make the legislation better.
Absolutely. Again, because we are people with lived experience who are talking with other people who have lived experience. One of the things about Access Living is really important is that peer support. And that's really listening to the perspectives of different people with racial identities who live across the state and the city of Chicago, and cross disability as well. One of the things that people assume is that we have a streamline of just people with physical disabilities, but we are a cross disability organization, and so we get to see different perspectives and different things.
Great. So, one of the things, of course, that has really been impacted through this COVID-19 pandemic is the issue of job loss. And we know that so many people across our nation have experienced job loss, and every week we see the increased number of claims filed for unemployment. I want to talk a little bit about sort of thinking about the disability community as it relates to getting hired in different positions. I know there's a saying that when you know better, you do better. What do you want to say to employers and business owners around how to attract job candidates who may have a disability, and not just attract for an interview, but to also lead to actual employment?
Employment for people with disabilities is extremely important for businesses to know that one, it is good practice to showcase your organization as culturally accepting of people with disabilities. And so once you do the interview, that's just the beginning, but actually within the organization, being able to provide accommodations for people with disabilities, being able to support privacy, but also cultural norms and acceptance of people with disabilities, and then really thinking of outside of the box of how different people with disabilities can contribute really valuable information and skill set and work ethic to the business world. I think is important for business to know. But also really thinking about how to make your business accessible. One of the things that we're noticing within this COVID-19 pandemic is one access feature is to actually work from home. And so now that everybody is working from home, you get firsthand how valuable that accommodation could be, but still being able to actually work.
Yeah, I think we were talking before about how, when you hear that, of course, Governor Pritzker here in Illinois issued a stay-at-home order, but for many or at least some in the disability community, there are many who may have had to be at home before and work from home, and that will continue even as we get through these 5 phases of the Restore Illinois plan. Is that?
That's correct. One of the things is when we talk about vulnerable communities, when it comes to COVID-19, underlying health issues had required that people, even before the stay-at-home order, stay at home. Because within our community, people with disabilities are more susceptible to contracting COVID-19. And then even after the stay-at-home order is lifted in these phases, a lot of people with disabilities will have to stay in their home even after that time frame, just because inaccessibility has showed that it has a detrimental effect on the disability community. And so COVID-19 is highlighting that in many ways.
And I think that's important to recognize when we talk about, for example, wearing a mask and all of the other things that people are being asked to do to take precaution. They might not feel like they are vulnerable, but you do take those precautions because someone else might be. And this is about thinking about others in our community. Can you talk a little more, Candace, about sort of Access Living and the kind of adaptations the organization has had to make in light of COVID-19? How have you had to change your service delivery model?
Sure. So one of the ways, just like everyone else, we're now working from home. And so we've transitioned from in-person meetings and contact to video calls. Another way is that right now, getting people access to protective equipment is extremely important. And so our organization has been working hard to reach out to the disability community to give them access to what they need. And then again, our advocacy is really, really strong during this time. We have to look at everything through a disability lens. And so speaking up and being educated and listening to our base about what's happening has been extremely important in our work in the advocacy arena. And so, and then the last thing is really getting the information out around COVID-19 and how it's impacting the disability community and guiding people through those processes.
Yeah. No, I imagine that, just like you said, everybody has had to figure out ways to kind of change the way that they have traditionally done business. And it sounds like there's a lot of new needs as well. So when you think about, kind of as my last question, what are 1 or 2 ways that people can actively support Access Living during this time?
So there are a few ways that you can support Access Living. One is we as a disability community, we always need additional support. So you could donate to Access Living through our website. And another way is, as we are thinking about plans and ways to support the community during COVID-19, making sure that you're taking actually stock of where people with disabilities are within your communities or your district. And when you're providing support, making sure that there's additional steps to support people with disabilities getting access to those things as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'm talking with Candace Coleman, who is the racial justice community organizer with Access Living. Candace, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me. I continue to learn, and I think what you kind of closed with about making sure that we are aware of the disability community kind of in all around us and in our own homes, families, community, neighborhoods, workplaces, and districts and state, and making sure that we are listening and incorporating the needs and the perspectives into the work that we all do. So thank you so much, and I hope you continue to be well, and I look forward to hopefully soon, or at least when it's okay to do so, being able to see you again.
Yes, thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Candace.